Hello, I'm Pato, and I read a bunch of books this year, and these are 13 of my favorites. Um, yeah, I'm gonna try and, I don't know. I wrote some stuff down, like some notes. I'll address them if I need to. Hopefully I won't need to. Um, I don't think I need a preamble for anything. These are the books I read. The Stone Face by William Gardner Smith. So when I was describing this book to my friends, I kind of compared it to Giovanni's Room because like big or like large scale, they're kind of similar in the sense that it's the story of an American who goes to France to try and like run away from himself in some way, being like disillusioned that you can outrun whatever you're scared of. And he arrives and then struggles to stay afloat in the face of a newfound love that is testing him, of racial violence, of his own traumas that he never addressed resurfacing. This book, however, unlike Giovanni's Room, is much more overtly political, and instead of exploring like these emotional depths, it looks really deeply at like race relations. They're at the forefront of this book, both within America and then attending France at like the inception of the Algerian genocide. And this black man who was driven out of America now is finding safety at the expense of others and has to deal with the moral weight of being complicit within that, and whether or not that's something he would be able to live with. I thought it was really great. I finished it and I've thought of it a lot since finishing it. Okay, the next book is The Seas by Samantha Hunt. This book, I can't think of like another book to compare it to. I can think of movies though, which I think speaks to how cinematic this felt to me. Super engrossing, super visual. I think part of it is because of how surreal and sort of metaphorical it portrays itself. It'll deliver things really matter-of-factly in a way that doesn't really make sense. The movies that I can sort of like that occupy the same space are like those classic sort of teen coming of age movies that are a little quirky, like Submarine or Moonrise Kingdom or Amelie. Something sort of whimsical and like elevated and awkward and bumbling and cute. A lot of the dialogue in this is like very that and like double meaninged and like funny quippy ways. This book takes place in a dilapidated small town. Oops, scared the hell out of me. My dog wants to come in. Okay, it's a small town. This is not gonna work. 1 second. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Small town, it's by the sea. Its claim to fame is having like the highest alcoholism rate in the country. It's like some coastal town full of fishermen. It's like rainy, slick streets, sort of foggy, misty. It sounds like Scotland, but it's like in like the coastal United States. But anyways, it's this girl living in this house that's like right by the sea, the same one that her father disappeared into as a child. And now she's 19 and is convinced that she's a mermaid. And she's in love with this Iraqi war veteran who has PTSD, who's like 10 years older than her. The house she lives in is this like hoarding house with her mother and her grandfather, who's trying to invent a new dictionary. And so it's like this apartment building or something, and every room is just full of antiques and books and maps and like letter stems for typewriters and like all sorts of different fonts. It's just like sort of like off kilter a little bit. It's charming in a weird way, but it's also really melancholic, where everyone in this town is resigned to a really sad life, but they're just victims of circumstance, so you can't help but like pity them. And she, our narrator, is the only one who's not just immediately resigning to an unhappy life. So it can feel hopeful, like that she's going to rise above, but also she keeps getting knocked back down, and it seems like it's all in vain. It's a bittersweet book. It's really charming. I liked it. Okay, next is Confusion by Stefan Zweig. This is sort of classic adjacent. I would compare it to John Williams, sort of like Stoner, where it's an academic novel and it is about an old man, but it's him recounting his life as a young boy, I guess, just entering college and falling in love with literature and learning, and specifically the relationship he develops with a professor and the professor's wife. And the three of them sort of form like the recycling sign, where it's like the three triangles, whatever, in a circle. It's like him, the professor, the professor's wife, and the arrows just keep like changing direction in terms of who is teaching who's the artist, who's the muse, who has like the power in the relationship, who needs who more. It's just like this blending and like sort of blurry mess that they're finding themselves in. But the language itself is so like heightened and romantic and evocative, and the situations are also supercharged with this sense of like wistful romanticism, because there's like this like knowing sadness or like tinge of regret as the old man is like recounting him being put in like these situations where he's failing or like didn't have the tools necessary to like deal with what he was dealt. Yeah, and it's just a little sad and wistful, and I don't know, I thought it was really beautiful. Not, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm gonna find like, there's like a sentence floating up there somewhere. I don't think I'm gonna find it, but a really good book. Another like the same sort of Bildungsroman, like formative years of your life book, is The Idiot by Elif Batuman. Another sort of academic campus novel, much more contemporary though, although it's not like contemporary, but it came out recently is what I mean. It's like 90s advent of email, and it's this girl who is attending her first year at Harvard, and it is not like a traditional sort of like plotty or atmospheric campus novel. It explores a lot of minutia, and her voice like as a narrator is so endearing, and I loved, the more I read, like being in her head and like being able to just see the way that she was interpreting the world, which was not just like immediately bending to the way things are presented. Like she would question most, if not all, things in like a really wry or interesting way. And yeah, I just found her super endearing. Maybe like one of my favorite characters that I've like read from the perspective of the book is not plot driven. It's sort of made up of these in between moments of campus life, like waiting in an office for some appointment, walking to and from classes, or daydreaming during a lecture, instead of like these big sort of like landmark things. And for the most part, there's not like an audience involved of like a recurring character. It's like her just interacting with a stranger or someone that like comes and goes like in like a fleeting way. And because of that, it sort of functions as seeing her behind closed doors. Like the way that she will act in specific situation is just so much more telling than some like calculated or like performative interaction with someone she likes or something like that. So you just see these like glimpses of like the real her over and over, and it's so intimate and like, I don't know, like instructive of like who she is or like who she will become, because she's still sort of like half formed as this impressionable and sort of like awkward, bumbling teenager who is trying to make her way through college, and the weird situations and relationships that she's being put into. Really special book, really loved it. I'm really sad that I can never read it for the first time again. If I could like erase my memories and do this one from scratch, I would. I'm reading the sequel right now and I'm trying really hard to like in the moment appreciate it, but it's one of those things that has just grown after the fact. And yeah, this was a really great book. I feel like I annotated like so much of it on the bottom, but yeah. Okay, some of them I don't own, which is why I'm just making sure I'm not going out of order. When we cease to understand the world. This is maybe the biggest surprise of the year for me. It's a nonfiction book. I did quotes for a reason, but it's a nonfiction book that explores sort of the history of history and like math and science. But it ended up being one of the most interesting things that I've maybe ever read, nonfiction wise especially, but it's like slightly elevated and the characters are real people, like real figures within whatever respective field, but they're treated in a way that they kind of function as characters. You get some internality that you wouldn't normally have. So it's like slightly heightened, slightly fictional, but mostly it's just rooted in truth, in like the history, which is so interesting that it doesn't really need any, propping up. A lot of this was new information to me, and a lot of it was delivered in a way that I found super engaging and interesting. It's delivered in a way that's really tangential, so it's sort of like run-on sentency or like jumping from like topic to topic, and initially you can't super tell why or like why something is being explained in so much detail or like how it'll relate back to where we started, but in the end it like all like just encompasses in such like a beautiful roundabout weird way. It kind of feels like How To with John Wilson, where like you'll start at one place and like end up somewhere completely different, but like the entire thing just functions so well. I don't know. Anyways, this I remember the first story the most because I was just like blown away. I was like, what just happened to me? That was crazy. Because it explores a bunch of seemingly disconnected or like coincidental events and just makes you realize how crazy it is that history happened. Like the odds were just so low of every individual interaction and scenario and thing ever. And it's just crazy to like recognize it and be told it in a way that doesn't feel like reading a textbook. Yeah, the first chapter is about like Renaissance paintings and like the inception of the color Prussian blue and how it came about as like a side effect of cyanide or like trying to do tests for poison, and then that leading to someone named like Haber or something. I forget the names, but someone inventing like chemical warfare essentially, and that same person, by doing that research, created artificial nitrogen, which was then used to like invent sustainable agriculture. And so it's like the duplicity of history basically, where every discovery has like an even greater cost, and it just sort of reciprocates over and over. Even if it's not like directly like progress to destruction, it can be like genius to like loneliness and like obsession and delusion and isolation. Just these notable figures presented in a way that is completely like new and like reinvents everything, at least for me. Maybe if like you're more knowledgeable it won't be as fun, but I had a blast reading this. It's crazy. Okay, this one I don't own, but Jazz by Toni Morrison. Okay, so I have liked every Toni Morrison book that I've ever read, minus Beloved. I'm sorry, I'll let that one sit for a second, but part of the reason why I didn't like Beloved was because everyone loved it so much that reading it, I had really high expectations, and I was going into it being like, this is one of the greatest books ever written, ever, and I'm so lucky that I get to read it for the first time. And then while I was reading it, I'd be like, when is like the best book ever gonna start? I was just being like really overly critical and never like allowing it to, I wasn't letting my guard down basically, and I was like just not impressed by it. And I kind of ruined the reading experience. Not to say that I think Toni Morrison is a writer that, if you do let your guard down, can affect you in a way that feels super transformative, and that's the experience I've had with the other books of hers that I've read. Jazz is no exception. I was really floored by this, and I think part of it is the form itself lends itself to letting your guard down because it starts in the same way as a book like The Secret History, where it'll like give away the climax or like whatever hyper violent thing happens immediately. Like first paragraph, you're like, whoa, what just happened? And then it'll rewind, like work backwards and like lead up, see how things played out and like got there in the first place. So in this book, in Jazz, it is a woman telling the story of this couple and their downfall. Husband and wife, and the husband has an affair with a teenager and ends up killing her, and then the wife attends the funeral procession and stabs the girl's body over and over. Crazy bananas. And from there it'll just unspool and like work backwards to who these people were to begin with, what they meant to each other, what the affair meant to them, but also who they were before they even met, and just like this really large scale and like in-depth character study of them both, but also of like the city. And it was just crazy. I don't know. I think because you don't have to brace for impact, like you already got the initial blow out of the way. For me, my guard was let down because I was like, well, I already know what happens. Like what else could go wrong? There is so much tenderness and like beauty explored in this book, which contrasts obviously like the violence it starts with, but yeah, just seriously like a really, really beautiful book. And I really liked it. Addiction by Design by, oh, I should have wrote her name down. I think it's like Natalia von Schüll. This is a huge book. It's like 500 pages, nonfiction, crazy interesting. It explores the rise of gambling addiction, namely because of slot machines, and the history of sort of the shift from analog machines to digital. It does this by including some interviews and sort of like humanizing these sort of rigid concepts by putting them like in the words of the people affected, the people who invented it, and the people who profit from it. So there's interviews with gambling addicts directly, the people who made the machines, and then the people who kind of like run/work in casinos, and also just explores like a literal history. The interviews are so chilling and like off-putting because they're immediately relevant, regardless of whether or not you know have or any knowledge of gambling addiction. But they immediately apply to social media use in a really strange way about how all three sort of like people in play refer to like zones that are induced of behavior, of thought, of etc. And there's just like an immediate mirroring to like doom scrolling and like this sort of like brain off, brain rot, whatever you want to call it. Very bizarre, intentional, but the same sort of founding principles that went into casinos becoming a billion-dollar industry have the same sort of blueprint as a lot of social media or like internet capital I things have become, in the sense that there was a shift from like money in like a literal sense to money through attention and like repeat customers, and like money through time, basically, like the relationship between the two. And there is like some Marxist elements as well that are explored, but just loosely, some of the like pitfalls and like ways that casinos predate a lot of things that are now staples is like mass surveillance. They initially were like one of the first shifts from analog to digital, and then from there within digital, like haptic feedback, predictive algorithms, selling demographic information, inducing like behavioral loops, valuing time spent over money earned. There's more. Anyways, just the way that some of like the sort of like predatory tactics that the people who made them and the people who profit explore really candidly will relate directly to the modern internet was just really scary to me, at least. And I went on to read like 5 other books that had to do with oops. Hello. Okay, I read like 5 other books that had to do with what was I saying? I don't know, like culture death or like media consumption, algorithms themselves, modern just like internet novels, and I feel like there's something afoot, and I'm trying to put it into words, and I haven't done it yet, but I want to. Anyways, this book specifically, I found super good, like crazy, insane, so good, really important. I poured over it. It's like 500 pages, and like I was studying it. But yeah, it like changed my relationship to technology. The next book is Picture Cycle by Masha Tupitsyn. This is like a mixed media sort of book. There's pictures, I swear, they're there. Anyways, it is a blend of a lot of things. I've actually never read a book like this ever. it's it's strange to try and categorize it. It's like a blend of memoir and film criticism and just literal like diary entries, and I don't know, it's just like very specific and esoteric. Like it'll describe really singular things that I just did not like, I just struggled to keep up with. But filmically, like relating to movies, she explores things in this sort of like abstract way of like what a camera provides, or like what the quality of film has to do with like preserving memory, or like representing an idea, or even like carrying like an untruth, like a misrepresentation that I don't know. I won't try to like from memory regurgitate, because it's just really untraditional and hard to describe. But yeah, she talks about like really specific minutia of her own life, of specific movies she cares about, or we'll just forego movies and talk about breakups at one point. It just felt super perverse, like in an invasive way, to like literally read someone's diary. Yeah, sort of like voyeuristic, which is then explored, like those same concepts of like voyeurism and like invasion within film and like within movies, is like cameras as blank. I thought it was really cool, but really, far out, I guess. Um, this next one I don't own, but All Fours by Miranda July was a really fun one. It explores a bunch of themes, but it's essentially an artist's midlife crisis, both creatively and literally, as this woman turns 45 or something, or like 50, and decides to go on a 2-week road trip up to New York, which will save her life or something. And then along the way, she gets distracted and has a lot of time to think about sexuality and desire and fulfillment, like the roles that she is playing in her life, sometimes against her own interests, in terms of like being a mother and being a wife, and that sort of constricting or getting in the way of her exploring herself fully. Another theme that comes up a lot is sort of like communion, where on her trip she gets distracted by and starts sort of like obsessing over this gas station attendant she meets, and there's this sort of yearning and pining for communion between them. There's also communion in terms of like a group of support. She's on some like online support groups for like stillborn mothers of menopausal women, her seeking comfort within like other groups of artists. It's one thing I don't want to say is, I don't want to say it's a weird book, because part of like the takeaway I had was how celebratory and earnestly and like openly it is showcasing intimacy in a way that is untraditional, and in a way that I found very compelling and very moving, just in terms of defining your own happiness and sort of reclaiming your own life. I feel like is sort of the central message, takeaway of the book. And although it gets to that point through these strange, sort of like abnormal displays of affection, uh, which are like zany and quirky, but Miranda July isms. I watched a bunch of her movies as well this year, but I feel like through finishing this book, I really came away respecting her as a person. I thought it's like auto-fictional, like she's inserting aspects of her own life into it, and I just admired how candid and sort of open she was. I thought it was really beautiful and just sort of defiant in terms of like reclaiming slash recoding the ways that we can choose to be, and then just celebrating the humanity within even things that are conventionally weird. It invokes like a sense of wonder that I feel like is easy to suppress. I really liked this book a lot. I'm getting like a little choked up. I don't even know why. I didn't cry while reading it, but I just think it's really like pure and unadulterated and good and earnest. Next is A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again. This is a collection of essays from David Foster Wallace, whose reputation precedes him negatively. And this was the book that, to me, changed my perception on him. I think that, surprisingly, his nonfiction is a lot more earnest and like sincere, like less sterile, intellectual than his fiction can be. I think his own voice conveys a lot about him, and the way and like things that he chooses to fixate on was revealing, I guess, about him, and surprised me. Content-wise, it's just a collection of writings. They're not all connected. He will write about like him playing tennis as a kid, his thoughts on media consumption slash television culture. He goes to like not a Ren fair, but like just a fair in like the Midwest. He goes on like a cruise for a week, which is like the title essay. He's on set for like a David Lynch movie at one point. A bunch of directions. His observations are like sort of wry and sardonic, but in like a playful way. But namely, I think that in like the media consumption essay was like the real star of the show for me. Although they were all pretty good. But he just like denounces cynicism and irony in a way that I was really surprised by, because I considered him to be both. I'd read some fiction before reading this, and yeah, just sort of like recolored his view in my eyes and like changed like the lens I was reading him through. And he came across a lot more sincere and earnest and not like pitiable, but like self-effacing. And I feel like there is like a sense of like a warping connotation wise, due to the fact that he does later commit suicide, that like you read him speaking and like are looking for some like warning sign of like unease or malaise or something. And yeah, I think he's just like self-aware to a fault, and at times like self-effacing and insecure, and that he treats his writing as sort of like a survival mechanism. He definitely like struggled socially, and like it was a way to connect and express himself fluently. And I think that he's a really good writer, and this is a really great collection, and I came away from it looking at him and sort of media at large differently. Yeah, pretty good. Following that is Rachel Cusk, who I actually kind of felt similarly to. Like, I think she's a little similar to David Foster Wallace, surprisingly, although I feel like her fan bases could not be more different. One thing that they do have in common, and I think it has to do with me reading one right after the other, is that they both sort of treat writing as a formal experiment, or are really interested in pushing or placing constraints upon themselves as they write. And they do it in different ways, obviously. But Miss Rachel Cusk in the Outline trilogy has taken it upon herself to characterize our narrator without ever giving her exposition like directly. You are only ever in the present moment with her, and in these strange interactions with strangers or people from her past. And the way that she acts sort of similarly to the idiot in like hyper specific situations just says so much about her as a person. And you sort of start piecing in what, I don't know, she takes on and like characteristics wise. Instead of like outline, this book is a little different where it explores a lot of minutia and dialogue centric. Like it, almost everything is just conversations between two people. I'm struggling to place it, but it's like sort of not political, but like philosophical, I guess. A lot of it is just like arguments, or not arguments, like discussions, uh, where people are disagreeing on a hypothetical, and it'll just get sort of like abstract and like philosophical. Um, I don't know. I'm struggling to like describe it. It's not like a plot heavy book. It is similar to Outline in that way, where like you'll just run into like a random stranger in like a train station. They have a discussion, and it's like a central, moment in the book. Um, I liked it. I liked being in like that sphere. Um, Enjoyable book. I'm liking this trilogy a lot, especially like formally. I think like the mental gymnastics you have to kind of jump through to like have something be compelling and also work in like a specific intricate way is really smart. um yeah, I'm excited for Kudos. Hopefully it can do like a three-peat of like one appearing in every best of the year list. That would be cool. This next one is just sort of like a light and casual read, a book that I liked. It wasn't that deep. It's called Taft by Patchett, and yeah, it's about this ex-jazz drummer who, after his life gets shaken up and the dust settles, finds himself separated from his son and his son's mother, and is managing a bar. You sort of follow him working through like his inner conflicts, and like his inner life, and these two kids, teenagers, apply to work for him at the bar, and he sort of hyperfixates on the girl, her younger brother, but namely their late father, whose name is Taft, and he just like really hyperfixates on that, and like trying to figure out what he meant to the kids, or like what their life was like. He sort of projects his own sort of like fatherhood issues of not being present for his son like onto this pair of kids, and they get like entangled in this sort of weird heightened relationship that they form. But yeah, a lot of it will like jump back and forth between present moment and then him daydreaming about what Taft was like as a person, and imagining these interactions that they had as a family before he passed. Um, yeah, tonally, it's cool. Very like moody and nocturnal. There's like a jazz motif throughout. Takes place a lot like in nightlife because it's in a bar, and it's just like rainy and cold. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good book. And the last one is Another Country by James Baldwin. This book, unrelated to anything in it, just makes me excited because I think it's like a life statistic that will maybe never be broken for me, that this is the single best dollar I've ever spent. I hope I can find a way to do better somehow, but the bar has been set pretty high. But yeah, I love James Baldwin very much, and this I think is his best novel to me. Um, I was just blown away by it. I feel like there's so much tenderness and tragedy within this book, and it contains a really unflattering cast of characters, in the sense that like it's not these people rising above the odds. It's also not them like succumbing to like purely being like these tragic, pitiable people, but they're just like so grounded and real, in the sense that they're like flawed and don't fully understand themselves. There's some classic sort of like James Baldwin motifs of queerness and race. There's a lot of like interracial relationships, and just the relationships themselves within this like friend group slash these people in general was really well explored and really easy to root for and be moved by. There's some obvious like sadness on display, but I don't know. I'm really struggling to come up with anything like a novel observation about this. It's really good. I feel like anyone who reads it will like recognize how good it is. I feel like I annotated on the bottom like every other page. It's just like there's a wealth of like it's so good. It was just so good. Outside of like the year favorite list, this would go in like my all-time favorite list. I think it's easily one of the best books I've ever read. Don't know what else to say other than that. It's really good. Yeah, those were the books that I loved in 2024. Looking forward to another year full of goodies. Yeah.